I hope this message, wherever you are, finds you in good health and healing. I wanted to share my story about losing my religion and deconstructing the faith that I grew up in, which was Christianity. It does seem like a lifetime ago, but I spent 40 years, I believe, living my life as a Christian. It was actually through the demise of my marriage that I really began to understand. It's sort of like when the blinders come off. It wasn't just the blindness that I had in my marriage, but the blindness I had in my faith and other relationships. And I just want other women and men, but mostly women, to know that I see you. And if you are struggling with your beliefs, that you are normal. And if you continue to just work through it, live through it, grow through it, you'll get better. I'm in no form or fashion healed completely by this. I have not gotten through it. I'm still deconstructing my faith, but I wanted to reach out because I know I'm not by myself. And I would like to possibly chronicle this on YouTube. And for anybody that's listening that you do not agree, we do not need saving or your classic comments about fear and hell, fire and damnation and how we should be stoned. We don't need that. That's what we're running from. So again, my sisters, if you are out there and you want somebody to, align yourself with, I'm here. I was married for almost 30 years, and I was a pastor's wife. We worked ourselves up in the ranks. I also grew up in church, but I saw a lot of stuff that I couldn't make sense of. And I honestly feel like that's really why churches push so hard for children to learn at such a young age, mostly because when you are being fed something as a young child, there's a sort of arrested development that takes place there, which in my mind, you are still, no matter how old you are still comprehending what you are being told in your whatever mind. For me, it was 7 years old is when I went to church and got baptized. It wasn't my decision. It was my mother's decision. I remember we started going to this church, and she said to me one day, when we go to church tomorrow, we're going to join the church. I didn't even know what that meant, other than we were just going to continue to go there, because at 7 years old, what do you know? We went to this church, and that was the beginning of my indoctrination, of course. We always kind of had like Bibles in the house, I believe, growing up. Prior to that, I am a Gen Xer. So this is late 70s, early 80s that we're talking here. There was no internet at the time, so everything that we knew and that we talked about was very localized. I mean, we wrote letters and watched the news and would read things like Time magazine, but there was no internet to kind of, come against what we were being told every Sunday in churches. And my belief only began to get stronger. I remember after I was married, and I married quite young. I was 19, still a baby when I got married. And I remember my faith growing really strong in the Christian church when I was ill and struggling with my second pregnancy. And that was really when I picked up the Bible and really became just so engrossed in the stories, because I remembered them as a child, but as I began to look at the scriptures, and also by then there were more translations. That's the word I'm looking for. There were more translations that were available to us. So I began to really make sense, because prior to that, the these, thous, yeas, and yo, it was just really stopping me, hindering me from absorbing, what was being told. But I began to absorb it and also try to apply it in my everyday life. And as I began to go on in my life and my marriage with my husband, and he began cheating on me, again, I began trying to apply those scriptures, and I would read those stories about, the men, and how even, David was considered the apple of God's eye after all the heinous crimes that he committed against not just man, but against, in the book, God. And I was trying to, of course, reconcile that. And for a long time, I did. And I began to just forgive my now ex-husband, thinking that, well, if God can, consider David the apple of his eye and all the things that he did, how much better am I? What's expected of me? How could I not give this man another chance? Because, he hasn't, quote unquote, murdered anybody, or I shouldn't say that, taken somebody off this earth. I'll use that term. But yes, I was trying to reconcile that, but towards the end of my marriage, when my health became poorer, when my mental faculties, just my emotional health was suffering so badly. And this was even before COVID. I think COVID for me was just the final nail in the coffin. I couldn't look at myself anymore with a straight face, and in the mirror every day, I began to just hate myself, because again, I'm a pastor's wife. I'm sitting here watching this person tell other people how to live their lives, and I know what I'm living with at home, and I couldn't do it anymore. So I had to walk away. And it first really began with me going to therapy. And I remember what I said to the therapist. I think I had been married about 25 years then. And I said to her, I want to leave. I just don't know how. And that began what is still now my healing journey towards, and I didn't know at the time that I was really deconstructing my faith, but I really was, because it just, so many things began to not make sense to me anymore. Over the years, I had attended many different counseling sessions with my ex-husband, and I will say I'm all for individual counseling. I am not for couples therapy. And because I've done all of them, the secular ones, the Christian ones, and they're not really set up to help unless you have very small, very non-destructive things that happen in a marriage. But for real wounds, it in my opinion, and that's all I can give, it doesn't really help, especially by the time you can get most men into counseling. And that's another discussion for another time. But I began just taking bits and pieces apart, and the way I began to see other people, because I will never forget the last conversation that I had with my own pastor. He said to me that he felt like my ex-husband was sorry, and that, he didn't say give him another chance, but that's basically what he alluded to. And he knew all the things that I had gone through. And even after that, where I felt like my physical health was in jeopardy, I knew my emotional health was in jeopardy, he still was advocating for my ex-husband. And I just couldn't reconcile that in my mind anymore. Like, why would you sit here and still encourage me after decades at this point now of infidelity to continue in a relationship? They love to use the term, is what God wants best, or I can't even remember it anymore. God's best. That's not God's best for you. That I believe that's the phrase that I would often hear. And I was thinking, is God's best really for me to sit in this marriage where I know that I'm literally being emotionally abused, even though, I think they feel like because nobody is laying hands on you that you really don't have cause to complain. And that's just so unfair. And so many women, and I am not stating that domestic physical violence is less important than emotional violence. What I'm saying is neither one should be tolerated or treated as though one is less than the other. Because the emotional violence, nobody really even sees that. And it leaves scars that don't ever really heal unless you go and get help. But the problem is, because you don't really see the scars, technically, you see it in the behavior, you see it in your health, but we're not taught to advocate for ourselves. And that's what I learned in therapy, was the ability to be able to advocate for myself. And it gave me the strength and the encouragement and the empowerment that I forgot who I was, and I was worth something, and that I didn't have to stay here and continue to take this, because my worth as a person is not wrapped up in being a wife. And in the long run, I realized my wealth was also not wrapped up in being a Christian either. So this is the first video. I hope to do more. But if you are out there and this is you or a part of you, you don't even have to be Christian to understand or even relate to what I'm saying. But I'm here, and I just hope that for somebody that is questioning or undecided and don't understand, I know what you're going through, and I feel your pain. Let's deconstruct together.